Okay, let's talk about carving wax. The wax that we use in casting is a hard wax. It's very carvable wax. It's not like candle wax, even though you could carve candle wax. This is a lot more rigid than that, so it's going to hold details a little bit better than a candle wax might. Even though you could practice with candle wax if you wanted to, but I've sent you plenty of wax to try carving. You should have a block of wax similar to this. This would be good for making like a pendant or earrings, or you could make a ring out of this. You'd have to drill your own hole. But you also have tube wax that looks like this, and this kind of gives you a head start by having the hole already present. This, I believe, is like a size 4 or a 4.5, maybe a 5. So for the most part, you would all probably have to open this up to make it fit you. In the metalsmithing studio, we've got tools that help you ream these things out. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to purchase and send each of you a tool that specific. So you'll have to do the best you can if you want to try to make a ring, to carve this and open that hole up a little bit. I'll show you different ways that you can potentially do that. But this gives you a head start. And one way to cut off a piece is with your saw. I sent you all a saw. This is not necessarily a jeweler's saw, but these things were relatively inexpensive, and they work really well for cutting and carving wax. I'm working on at a jeweler's bench, and this is called a bench pin here. I don't expect any of you to have a bench pin. Working on a tabletop surface would work just fine. If you happen to have a block of wood, you could potentially prop this up so you're not cutting into your tabletop surface. Obviously, we don't want to ruin your table. And if you're staying with your parents or a friend or something like that, you don't want to ruin their furniture. But if you can get yourself off to the edge of the table or whatever surface you're working on, that way you can kind of get clearance for the saw to pass by, so you're not trying to cut straight down onto the surface. But very simple thing to do. Just start cutting this wax. And most rings are not going to be as wide as this piece of wax, so you want to cut a chunk off of here. It takes a little bit of time. It's messy. All wax carving is pretty messy, so you may want to have something in your lap to collect the wax as it falls, or just know that you're going to have to sweep it up. Okay, not much to this. Once you get most of the way through, you can just snap that off so you don't lose it on the floor. So this is now, a little more manageable. It's a little bit more scale appropriate for your finger. Obviously, I can't get that on very far, but my pinky, I can get it up about that far. So I'd have to open this thing up if I was to make it for myself. So let's talk about how to do that. I sent you some carving tools, a box full of them. These carving tools are really, really cheap, okay? They're not the best carving tools for what we're using them for. Actually, they say that they're wood carving tools, which I can't imagine carving wood with these things. But for wax, they actually work quite well. They are coated with like some kind of a shellac or some kind of a protective coating on these surfaces, because this is steel. So there's potential that these things would rust, before they ever get into anybody's hands. So I also sent you a file, actually a set of files, but you should all have a file like this. And this is a pretty aggressive file, and it's great for carving wax, but it also will help you remove that shellac surface, because that's going to get in the way of the edge, that sharp edge. You can see the cutting edge here, and I just take the file and just very lightly, those are my dogs in the background, just ignore them, but just very lightly file those surfaces to remove the varnish or the shellac that's on there. That way you have a sharper edge. It doesn't really matter if it's on, you know, up in here, but down right on the cutting edges, that's where you want to remove the protective coating. So these things work pretty well they're used as, you know, carving tools. So you can go in and gouge, you know, and cut material away. Obviously be careful, because if you slip, that's pretty sharp and you can go into your finger. So try not to cut towards yourself, obviously. But I don't really use these things this way. I use them more as a scraping tool. You can see how, let's just do this 90-degree edge over here. Hey Harrison, you want to grab the dogs? You can see how I was able to put a bevel on that corner pretty easily, just by scraping, just pushing wax. I'm holding the tool at, you know, a little bit of an angle, and you'll get very familiar with how to do that. It's a great way to remove material while also maintaining sort of a flat edge there. So that's kind of a cool way to use these things. You know, these things, we're not even sure that we're going to be able to cast these things. So it's not even that important if you want to try to make a ring that it fits the perfect finger for you. This is just a sample just to give you an idea of what carving wax is all about. Hopefully we will be able to cast these things. But it's just to give you an idea of what the jewelry making process is actually like, the casting process, which, you know, many of you, most of you actually signed up for. This is just to give you sort of an overview of that initial step. So carving a ring, I'll maybe circle back and do a little more of a demo on carving a ring. I've actually started carving from this block of wax. I cut off a chunk of wax. You know, I took my tool and maybe scored a line, you know, across here to cut a piece of wax off with my saw. And then I'd start with, you know, something a little bit more manageable. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This actually takes a little bit longer than you might think. Because it's more of a solid block, I don't have that hole in the middle. It takes a little bit longer, but it still goes fairly quick. So I started out with a block, you know, a chunk of wax like that. And then I just took a sharp tool of some kind. This is, you know, more of a caliper kind of a thing, but it's very sharp on the end. And I drew, you know, on here just 2 circles. Like this. Just to give me a place to start. So I've got something to aim for. Okay, a sharp tool can give you just a, you know, a nice little sketch of what you're trying to do on here. And then you can use your saw to cut away all of this excess. This one I actually, you know, maybe utilize the block of wax a little bit better. I should have brought these out further, but it doesn't really matter. But I can take, and now I can cut away the excess material here using my saw. So the saw is a really great tool for just removing big chunks of material. All right. So, you can see I just removed a lot of material very quickly. All right, looking at kind of our prototype here. This is obviously not completed yet either, so I'm just going to try to get from this stage to this stage, and then I'll do another video to kind of see how we can refine this. To drill holes in here, we can use our carving tools. This tool here is actually quite nice for drilling holes. You can just place this right in the middle of where you want that hole to be, and we can just spin the carving tool, and you can see how nicely that's going to drill a hole for us. You can go part way through, you can go all the way through, it doesn't really matter, it's up to you. But you can see, there we go. So it gives you a pretty clean hole, actually. So I'll do this twice. So I mentioned earlier that these tools are really cheap, and they are. But for carving wax, they do a pretty good job. Just don't abuse them, because this little bit of steel here is just shoved up inside this dowel, and they can pretty easily break here, I suppose. But we're not putting a ton of pressure on these things either. So they should last just fine. All right, let's take our file. So our file is another way to take off a lot of material quickly, because these are pretty aggressive files, but they also leave a pretty decent surface too. So files cut in one direction. So they cut on the push stroke. They will grind away material on the pull stroke, but they are meant and they're designed to cut on the push stroke. So I lift after every push of the file. That way I can see what I've done. If I go back and forth like this, I have no idea how much material I've taken off underneath, because I can't see it. So if I remove material, do that push stroke and lift, I can see exactly how much material I've taken away, okay? So get in the habit of just doing this push stroke, lift, and it allows you to kind of reset. It allows you to get a look at what you just did, and then it allows you to adjust the angle of your file depending on what it is you're trying to do, okay? So with those few strokes that I just did, I think you can probably see I've created a new plane here. We've got this flat plane on the surface, but then I've got this new plane happening over here. And what I'm going to try to do is remove material on this area to lower that area, to give it some depth and dimension. So I'm doing the exact same thing that I have going on here, where this side looks like it's going to go down below and underneath this. So it's just a design feature. It's going to go wrap around and kind of do this, figure eight. Obviously, it looks like a figure eight, but it could be an infinity symbol too. So I'm going to remove some material here and here to give the depth and dimension to make it look like it's going underneath. So I'm going to do that really quickly. Now it's really easy to take off more material than you needed to or you wanted to. So take it slow and easy. I've done, quite a lot of this kind of work, so I can work fairly fast, but you're going to go slower than this. So I think you can see here, I've got this side look like lowering, so it looks like it's going underneath. I'm going to now work on this side, so it goes underneath this area here. Also, as you are working, your file might get clogged, and it won't feel like it's cutting as well as it first did. You can see this is where I've been using the file, and it's starting to get filled with wax. I've got a little brush here. You could, if you have a toothbrush, it's really easy to just knock that wax out of this file, okay? And you'll be doing this regularly. So just make sure that your files are cutting well, and if it doesn't feel like it's cutting well, take a look at it. It might be getting gummed up. Yeah, now the file seems to be cutting a lot better. Also, I'm going to round this out a little bit more on the sides. It's really very geometric at this point. So I'm going to take the file and just knock down those corners and make it a little more roundy. And I can get inside this corner here. This is a 90-degree corner. I'm going to just lay the file right up inside there. And you can see the file has teeth across both surfaces, but it also has teeth on the edges. So you can use the edges to, file a groove into a piece. Let me just use a piece of scrap here. You can see. For something like this, if I'm going a long ways, I can go back and forth. If you really have a long way to go, it's a lot faster to file like this, obviously. So you can see I've filed that groove in there with just using the edge. So you can use all sides of the file. Let me just get these edges finished up. And also, let me just show you this. See the lines that are in here? That's from the saw. So the saw is a pretty rough tool. It leaves behind these tool marks. And the casting process picks up on all of that stuff. So if I didn't do anything to clean those off or to smooth those out, the casting would have that as part of the surface treatment. So the more work you can do in refining the surfaces, in the wax, the less work you'll have to do in the metal. It's a whole lot easier to refine the surfaces in wax than it is in the metal. So we do as much work to make the surfaces as pristine as possible if you want a really smooth surface in the wax before it gets to metal. And you can see that here, just this is the area that I've just filed. It's not perfect, but it's a lot smoother than this area, okay? And there's ways to make it even smoother yet, because we've basically taken saw marks and replaced them with file marks, okay? And if this was metal, then we could then replace that with sandpaper marks, and then eventually make it super, super smooth with the buffing wheel. Unfortunately, we're just probably not going to get there, but I didn't want to deprive those of you that signed up for the casting class of at least having a little bit of experience, understanding the actual process of making a piece of jewelry. So this will at least get us to the point where you've created something that could potentially be turned into metal. And I will explain the whole lost wax casting process. Actually, I've got a good video that I've posted on the Moodle page for you to watch that really does explain that. But I will actually do a casting live in class. All right, so I've smoothed out these edges here. Oh, got a little more to go over here. And you can see how messy this gets. So, that was a pretty fast little bit of carving and cutting to get to this point. Obviously, I've refined this one quite a bit more, and I will set up another video. I want to keep these fairly short. So I'll set up another video and kind of do more refining of this piece to get to this point here. So anyway, those are the tools that we'll be using. And I've just, to reiterate, I've used basically 3 tools: the saw, the file, the big file, and then these scraping tools. You also have small needle files that we'll get into a little bit, probably in the next video. So, all right.